You're watching WDSU in BC, New Orleans. And now, The William Stuckey Show. Welcome, everyone, to The William Stuckey Show. I'm William Stuckey, and tonight will be the first in a series of episodes that we're calling Latin Listening Post, that deal with people who are more or less directly involved in the conflict between the United States and Cuba. And we have with us a very special guest, a man who, in this period when communism is receiving so much criticism from the left and right alike, is not afraid to call himself a communist. He is the secretary of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, and his name is Lee H. Oswald. Mr. Oswald, welcome to the show.
Well, first of all, I would like to make it clear that I am already being slandered and attacked by being called a communist. I have never referred to myself as a communist. This is not a word I would use to refer to myself. I am a Marxist-Leninist, and immediately after the show is over, I will be consulting with legal counsel, or rather I will be searching with legal counsel to consult with, or to tell me whether or not I now have grounds to bring a case for slander, for you having called me a communist, which is a term that I would never associate myself with, and also for libel, because presumably some transcripts of the show will be printed.
Well, I certainly don't think there will be any need for that, and I intended no insult, I assure you, other than the insult some would consider implicit in the word communist itself, of course. Now, why is it that you insist on the difference between communism and what you call Marxism-Leninism?
Well, communism is too readily associated with Soviet Russia, and communism in Soviet Russia has come to define a philosophy that I and others, like the other members of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, believe has broken off dangerously from the truth of Marxism-Leninism, and that is why I only call myself a Marxist-Leninist, and I would never call myself a communist.
And to simplify things for the sake of our listeners, you're referring, of course, to the German philosopher Karl Marx and the Russian revolutionary Vladimir Lenin, are you not?
That's right. The Karl Marx and the Vladimir Lenin, which you may not know, you probably don't know, was not Vladimir Lenin's real name. In fact, his name was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, and most of the original Soviet revolutionaries had to use false names. In fact, Joseph Stalin's name was not Joseph Stalin. It was Joseph Vissarionovich Djugashvili, and the name of Leon Trotsky was not Leon Trotsky. It was Leon Bronstein. And this is the sort of information which I have at my disposal because I am very aware of facts, and at any given time I'm capable of dispersing and disseminating, and also of retaining information of the very greatest importance.
And what would you say are now the most pressing concerns for what you would call the real Marxist-Leninist left?
Well, the question on the left of the greatest importance is what it always is, and namely what's happening on Twitter, which is where all real political activity of serious import occurs. What podcasts people are listening to, and what specific words people are using, and whether or not they're disqualifying themselves from the real Marxist-Leninist left. And at the moment, I would say all of these concerns are most encapsulated in the question, what is to be done about Cum Town? And Cum Town is, of course, attacked from the right and the left alike as bourgeois or as offensive, but a real Marxist-Leninist would never allow himself to think, so undialectically, to be so ignorant of the potential that the program shows. And so I'm not afraid to say that here I am. I'm Lee H. Oswald. I'm the secretary of the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. I am a Marxist-Leninist, and yes, I am a cum boy.
All right, everybody. Death is just around the corner, number 72. One in which we finally talk about the guy I have been calling the representative American of the second half of the 20th century, Lee Harvey Oswald. And Jesus Christ, is there a lot to say about Lee Harvey Oswald, and I will get to that as quickly as possible, but just a couple prefatory notes, as usual, a couple little things I got wrong last time that I wanted to correct. ARPA, it's Advanced Research Projects Administration. I know that. I don't know why the fuck I said agency. Administration, not agency. The other thing, Richard Bissell, one of the three men that Kennedy fired, Dulles, Cabell, and Bissell, in cleaning out the leadership of the CIA after the Bay of Pigs. I refer to Bissell as working for the National Reconnaissance Office of the CIA. Actually, the National Reconnaissance Office is part of the DoD, but Bissell had been one of Dulles' right-hand men for quite a while. He was the deputy director for plans of the CIA from 1958 to 1961. He personally negotiated on Bay of Pigs with Sam Giancana, Santo Trafficante, Johnny Rosselli, Carlos Marcello, and Meyer Lansky. He drafted the first unused version of the Bay of Pigs plan, and this will become very important later on. You'll see why. He was personally in charge of the U-2 spy plane project. So Bissell, even though at the time he wasn't working at the CIA, he was one of Dulles' boys, would have been perfectly in position to continue Dulles' mandate at the CIA, or even just via his position in the Department of Defense. So Kennedy sacking him, along with Cabell and Dulles, sent a definite message. One thing, too, I should make clear, I talked about that first failed November 2nd, 1963 plot to assassinate Kennedy in Chicago, and talked about how the CIA were planning to blame both the assassinations of Kennedy and Ngo Ding Diem on communists, and thus heat up the Cold War. And then I talked at great length about how Thomas Arthur Valley, the patsy in the case, was extremely right-wing. He's a racist, Bircher gun nut. Well, as with Oswald, they were perfectly prepared to lie their asses off about Valley once Valley took the blame for it, and perfectly prepared also to counterfeit whatever documents were necessary to substantiate their fake claims. And we'll be talking about counterfeit documents, too. A couple things, too, I just sort of brushed up against and wanted to talk about at slightly greater length. Number one, mentioning the CIA's role in Afghanistan in the early 1980s, giving the Mujahideen $1 billion fucking and helping to create the terrorist network that would later be known as Al-Qaeda. Well, you talk about the CIA, you talk about Afghanistan, and you would just be doing yourself a disservice not to talk about heroin, because quite a few people probably will know that Afghanistan is one of the heroin hotbeds of the world, but there are two things that you may very well not know about Afghanistan and heroin. The first of them is that it's our fault that Afghanistan has heroin. God, the United States history is full of villains. It's really hard to choose one, but I have a special kind of hatred for Harry fucking Truman, not least because he and I are sons of the same soil, and I have to see tributes to him every goddamn place. Along with having to see the geography of his rise up the political ladder as in his own words, a whorehouse piano player. I mean, Harry Truman was a failed haberdasher who got into politics because the Kansas City Mafia offered to pay off his debts if he could get elected and then do them favors in government. And that's one reason to hate Harry Truman. The second reason would be that he took the vice presidential nomination from Henry Wallace in 1944. A United States under President Henry Wallace would have been unimaginable. It might have stopped the entire Cold War. President Henry Wallace wouldn't probably have been quite as significant as, say, President Eugene Debs, but it would have been real goddamn close. Wallace could have been one of the greatest presidents we've ever had in this country, and almost certainly would have changed the entire course of American and therefore global politics from 1945 onward. So fuck Harry Truman for that one. Charles Olson, the great poet, worked for the Democratic Party and the Office of War Information until Truman got the nomination over Wallace. And at that point, he quit, realizing there was nothing to be done through the traditional channels. And a third reason, well, actually, a third reason to say fuck Harry Truman is the fact that he completely unnecessarily killed hundreds of thousands of people with nuclear bombs. There's that little detail. A fourth reason, however, to say fuck Harry Truman would be heroin and Afghanistan. Because you see, right after World War II, right at the beginning of the Cold War, Afghanistan was hotly contested territory, gateway to Eurasia and all that, and nobody knew if it was going to fall to the American bloc or the Soviet bloc. So Truman tried to gain Afghan support by launching a half-assed series of quasi-New Deal style projects inside Afghanistan, not particularly caring enough to do any of them well. And one of those projects was a dam building. And because we didn't actually give a fuck about, Afghan infrastructure, we were just doing this as a political overture, we managed to fuck up the entire Afghan water table by building dams that raised the level of the groundwater in the country, which in turn fucked with its chemical composition and thus the chemical composition of the soil that all the farmers there depended on. So over the course of a few years, we ruined the livelihoods of thousands and thousands of Afghan farmers who couldn't grow the things they used to grow. What they could grow, however, was opium poppies. We turned Afghanistan into basically the ideal opium poppy plantation. Now, this is one of the rare cases where I'm willing to believe almost totally in our stupidity and incompetence and indifference. But goddamn, it sure was convenient to suddenly have, the greatest heroin patch in the world in our, as it were, geopolitical backyard, if not geographical backyard. And some of you probably remember in the recent and ongoing Afghan war, the various periodical attempts we've supposedly made to crack down on heroin in Afghanistan. Every few years, someone comes out and says, folks, this is a real problem, and god damn it, we're not going to sit idly by anymore. Well, heroin production is way higher now than it was when we invaded Afghanistan. That cracking down hasn't just not worked, it has done the opposite of what it was supposed to do. That is, if you believe it was actually supposed to be cracking down on heroin production. Now, I try to be very careful on this show to tell you when I know something and when I am guessing something. I'm going to be doing a lot of that with Lee Harvey Oswald here in a second, because there's a lot I know about Oswald, and I want to make clear that I know it. What I'm about to say now is a guess, but it's a pretty educated guess. It's a guess with a lot of history behind it, right? The CIA was using the Corsican Mafia to traffic heroin all over Europe during Operation Gladio right after World War II. It was trafficking heroin out of Laos during Project Hotfoot and Operation White Star. It was trafficking heroin out of Vietnam and Cambodia all through the Southeast Asian War from, call it 62 or 3 until about 74. And it then, of course, trafficked shitloads of cocaine out of Central America, which then became crack, which it trafficked to primarily black and primarily poor neighborhoods all over this country. So when I see a nation like Afghanistan increasing its heroin production under a U.S. occupation, I, for one, cannot help but think that it would be pretty goddamn naive of us not to assume the CIA is involved in some way, and that the CIA is probably trafficking heroin out of Afghanistan. Now, will that ever be proven? I have no idea. So, now let's get to the man of the hour, and really the man of the last 55 goddamn years, Lee Harvey Oswald.
Southern Pacific 17,825, Southern Pacific 34,625.
Now, I'm going to talk all about Lee Harvey Oswald in factual terms here in just a minute. But first, I want to explain what I mean when I say that Oswald is in many ways the representative American of the last half century. And in order to explain this, I have to do a little bit of exegesis on an idea that I have come to refer to elsewhere in my work as a thing called the Eikonosphere. Not the ionosphere, the Eikonosphere. And actually, it was studying Oswald that in part helped give me the idea for this. The Eikonosphere is a level of cultural existence and particularly media existence. It is the level on which the images of celebrities live, whether political, athletic, artistic, whatever. The Eikonosphere is the world as presented through mass media, the layer of reality on which the news happens, in which current events take place, in which history, as it will be recorded, is committed. The Eikonosphere is what we are all constantly being told is the real world, the world out there, the world as opposed to just your life. It is sold to us as both more real than us and better than real, super real. I'm not talking Baudrillard here. I'm not quite talking hyper reality. It is the realist kind of reality and also possesses a sort of sheen or glimmer of super reality. It is where, we are told the actual epoch occurs, the history-marking events go down, and where, the beautiful people, or sometimes just the infamous people, where they live, the exalted superstratum upon which they survive and over which they preside. And this is all presented to us through mass media. There are analogies for the Eikonosphere and other less mediated eras of history. You could talk about, say the lives of the saints in the Middle Ages, for example, or in a certain sort of stereotypical view, the Greco-Roman gods, although I think that's a grave misinterpretation of Greco-Roman religion. But anyway, you get the idea. The Eikonosphere is the place above us. It's where the important people do the important things that our time will be remembered for. We don't get to live there. And part of the secret of the Eikonosphere is that actually no one lives there. What lives there are personae in the literal and original sense of the word. The Latin persona, it means a mask. The masks of the famous and the beautiful people, they are what live in the Eikonosphere, the world of icons. And the effort required, and sometimes even beyond effort, the simple fact of having one's mask exist up there is more than enough to kill any number of human hosts. Fame is a virus. Celebrity is a parasitic organism that feeds upon the host body that's left down here with all the rest of us while it grows stronger and stronger. And of course, nothing can more fervently and solidly ensconce an icon, a persona in the Eikonosphere than the dramatic and especially premature death of its host, right? And for a long time, the Eikonosphere was very difficult of access. There were, Hollywood studio machineries and political machineries and record industry machineries that basically controlled who got to be there and who didn't. There are two developments that have kind of disastrously quasi-democratized access to the Eikonosphere. One of them, as you might expect in the modern era, is social media. Now all of the sort of PR techniques that studio employees were using to project the images of their signed-on actors or actresses 70 years ago, now anyone with a computer is using those for him or herself every day, trying to create a manicured public image worthy of inclusion in the iconosphere, basing, in fact, their entire lives around what will be worthy of attachment to this image. What little appurtenances and apparatus will make the image more lasting, more indelible, harder to forget, harder to shake off. So everything, celebrity of the managed kind, celebrity of the star system Hollywood era, all those little machinations that it was involved in, well, those have been devolved onto the consumer now, at least in the, mediatized Western world. And virtually everyone is thrilled to have been given the ability to be their own PR agents. This fucking psychic slavery is sold to us as democratization. And just enough people do make it into the real iconosphere via this process, do get TV shows, record deals, whatever, that it keeps the rest of us at least half thinking, well, maybe if I keep going, someone will recognize me, someone will let me in. That's one way to get in. If you don't have money, or you're not beautiful, or you don't have any outstanding talent, or you're not from a powerful family, the 1 in a million chance of the manicured self-image via social media might get you to the iconosphere. The other method is violence, and particularly public violence, and particularly public violence against someone very, very famous. And, you think of Mark David Chapman and John Lennon. In some ways, the ideal example here would be Hinckley, because he wasn't just trying to get into the iconosphere. He was trying to kill one of its images, one of its resident personae, so that he could then have a relationship with another one of its resident personae. He was trying to use the corpse of Ronald Reagan as the door that would get him to Jodie Foster. Except, of course, it's not really Ronald Reagan. It's not really Jodie Foster. It's their images. It's their icons, their projected personae. And one imagines he would have been rather disappointed if he actually had the chance to meet Jodie Foster. I'm sure that Jodie Foster is a perfectly lovely human being, but she's not the icon. The icon is a parasite that preys upon her. It's no fucking wonder that so many famous people absolutely lose their goddamn minds. And every public assassination of a famous person, and every instance of such an assassination giving the assassin access, even if only briefly, to the iconosphere. I don't know how many people remember the name John Hinckley now. I think Mark David Chapman is pretty well remembered. Manson, of course, is very well remembered, ironically enough, since he didn't kill anyone. But it at least gets them in the door. Every one of those, the godfather, the image that stands at the beginning of that lineage, is Lee Harvey Oswald, who, like Charles Manson, and now I'm talking facts, let me be clear, not conjectures, who didn't kill anybody, who was 100% involved in the plot to kill someone. Lee Harvey Oswald was absolutely a planner of the Kennedy assassination. He did not kill John Kennedy, but goddamn if he didn't make his way into the iconosphere for all time. And I say this about him not simply because, it works from an outside analytical perspective, but because Oswald himself incessantly wrote and talked about it. In his letters, in his diary, Oswald is obsessed with the idea of course, he doesn't use the word iconosphere, but of breaking into the kind of stratum of reality that I'm talking about. You know, the reality they show you on the movie screen that's somehow more real than your own life. I'm paraphrasing here, but at one point he writes, I believe in his diary, about the point of life being to merge one's own individual existence with the greater tide of history. And at another point, he writes in a letter, I believe to his brother, that happiness consists of erasing the boundary between one's own world and the world in general. Oswald was absolutely determined to gain some kind of access to what he considered the world in general, the world of history, some escape from the stifling fucking suffocation of the alienated subject and the, alternately endlessly boring and endlessly horrifying fucking cesspit that is the contemporary United States of America, and has been obviously for quite some time, since at least Lee Harvey Oswald was kicking around. He needed a way to abolish the contours of his own life, to terminate the status that kept him, bound in the singular frame of just this one miserable kick around shithead with nothing in particular to his name, just another guy in dirty clothes going home from a shitty job at the end of a day that no one will ever remember, to the world of icons, the world of history, the world in general, as he put it, apart from his bounded, closed, horribly asphyxiative world. That, more than anything else, is why I talk about Lee Harvey Oswald as the representative American. Lee Harvey Oswald is the patron saint of the age of social media. And don't think we aren't eventually going to get someone murdered on YouTube or Periscope or whatever. Someone will, live snap a political assassination. That's gonna fucking happen. I don't know where and I don't know when, but it will happen. Get ready. And when it does, Lee will be standing over it. Not, as I say, because he killed anybody, but because Lee did what a lot of us do in various ways. He joined up with anyone who promised him that they could abolish that barrier between his personal world and the world in general, between his life and the life of history. And Lee did whatever they said on the basis of that promise, and on the basis of the thought that, hey, if things ever got too fucking serious and frightening, he could always get out of it. He was a smart guy. He could wriggle his way into and out of any number of situations. So if they really tried to fuck him, he'd just disappear, And naturally, they were more powerful and more forward-looking than he was, and Lee Harvey Oswald only realized way too late that he was at the center of a plot he thought he was constructing around someone else. He thought he was planning the assassination of John Kennedy. He didn't realize he was also planning the assassination of Lee Harvey Oswald. There is, I think, very good evidence, and I'll talk about that later, that in the weeks approaching the assassination, he began to realize, oh shit, I look a whole lot like a patsy, don't I? But clearly wasn't enough to save him. So, this is all Oswald in general terms. Now, before I get to the chronological Oswald, the biography, I want to give you two things which might very well be considered facets of the same one thing, but two very, very specific things to remember about Lee Harvey Oswald to inform all the rest of what I'm about to say. One of them I have mentioned before, but I don't know. God, it's been several episodes. So just in case you don't remember, I'm going to say it again. The Warren Commission, the inquiry into JFK's assassination, it was a crock of shit. It was always designed to be a crock of shit. I'll talk later about the way it was designed to be a crock of shit. And one thing that people generally don't know about the Warren Commission is that there were a number of secret closed-door hearings that were never read into the record that you will not find in the, 26 volumes of the collected, Warren Commission testimony and evidence. At one of these closed-door hearings, 2 ex-CIA agents were compelled to admit on the basis of documentation presented in court, not, mysterious alleged documentation, but documents that were right there on the table, that as of December 1960, he was a CIA asset. Lee Harvey Oswald was CIA as of December 1960. They also admitted that at the time of Oswald's death, the CIA had an open personnel file on him. And they admitted that it appeared he was also picking up a spare $200 a month as an FBI informant. Though whether or not he ever fed anything to the FBI or how much he fed, we'll probably never know. Although we have one pointer that I'll get to later. So, December 1960, proven. Lee Harvey Oswald was a CIA asset. And to get ahead of ourselves just briefly, if you know anything about Oswald's chronology, you're probably thinking to yourself, wait, December 1960? Wasn't Oswald in the Soviet Union then? Wasn't he supposedly a defector then? Yeah, he was. And so you might come to ask, so wait, was he CIA before he went in? And I'll answer that at greater length, but the short version is yes. His defection story is a complete fucking lie. He was never a defector, he was a spy. I didn't mean that to rhyme. It did. I want to answer that question, wait. Oswald is CIA, but he's in the Soviet Union? I want to answer that by way of talking about Don DeLillo's novel Libra, another great DeLillo novel. I keep mentioning him in these episodes. Libra, to me, one of the best, probably 3 or 4 he's ever done. Libra, Underworld, Running Dog. Those, I think, would be my picks for his best work. And Libra presents a fascinating version of Oswald. Presents the Oswald that first got me thinking about him as, the epochal figure of the later 20th century in America, even more than Kennedy. I think now, in retrospect, having, Jesus Christ, been looking into this for 10 years, that DeLillo's portrait of him is inaccurate in a number of ways, which I'll discuss later. I think he takes Oswald way too much at his word about both his biography and his, various political sympathies, and that he presents Oswald as much more confused and having much less agency than Oswald actually was until the end, when he had very little fucking agency indeed. But, that's not the point. I mean, it's a novel. We're not looking for one-to-one historical verisimilitude here. The point is that he created a brilliant character out of Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, I was just reading Libra again in preparation for this episode on the off chance that I would find something worthy of inclusion. And boy, fucking did I. Because I started just idly constructing a table of the people, or I should say the characters in Libra, and what real-life people I thought they probably corresponded to. Now, again, these aren't perfect, congruent correspondences. They're just, DeLillo takes the contours of someone's career and maybe something about personal appearance or lifestyle or conversational tics, whatever. It's not that X equals Y. It's never that clear cut in a novel, let alone this novel. But one decent guideline to go by is to look at who was dead and who was alive when DeLillo wrote Libra. 1988. David Ferrie's dead. Guy Bannister's dead. He can talk about those people by name. Anyone who's still alive in 1988, he's not just worried about libel here. I mean, he would be very reasonably worried about getting his fucking head blown off. So, if a character has a fictionalized name, he's probably somebody who was alive in 1988, right? And these are just my provisional identifications, and you may have your own. I think T.J. Mackey, the guy who ends up taking charge of the assassination plot, is pretty clearly based on Frank Sturgis, the CIA goon of all goons we've talked about before. He was involved in the overthrow of 7, 8 governments, something like that. I think Lawrence Parmenter is based on E. Howard Hunt, who is the sort of number 2 goon of all goons, and like Sturgis was arrested for the Watergate burglary, but was more urbane, fancied himself more of a James Bond sort of figure. The parts of Libra about Parmenter's kind of hip, jet-setting, almost bohemian life in D.C. perfectly fit Howard Hunt. I think Remo, one of the 2 Cuban hitmen, is David Sanchez Morales, the CIA asset and, Bay of Pigs agent, and Christ, was he Alpha 66? Maybe Alpha 66. I believe he was involved in Allende's overthrow too, from the way he's described physically more than anything else. And the clearest identification I made on this sort of first round is that the character DeLillo calls Frank Vasquez, he's got to be Antonio Veciana. Veciana, who is important for a number of reasons at the time, because he was the man in charge of Alpha 66, the illegal anti-Castro terrorist squad, or rather, I should say, the man in charge of it under David Atlee Phillips, the CIA agent who actually ran it, and later because he both positively ID'd David Atlee Phillips as Maurice Bishop, the imaginary Maurice Bishop, and because he testified that he had seen Oswald and Atlee Phillips together in Dallas, I believe September of 1963. You read the description of Vasquez in Libra, the long, thin, gaunt face, and the teeth so fucked up it almost looks like he has 2 rows of them on the bottom. And then you see a photo of Antonio Veciana, and I mean, that's him. There's just no way it's not him. But one of the main characters of Libra, the protagonist of some parts of the book, as many of you will know, is a guy named Walter Everett Jr., Win Everett for short. And Win is the guy who comes up with the idea to fake a Kennedy assassination and to put together via documentation a dossier, an entire biography, in fact, for an imaginary shooter that will lead back to Castro and the Cuban Intelligence Directorate. And so he gets started faking documents, working in semi-exile. He was part of Bay of Pigs. He fucked up badly. He ends up getting sent to be a CIA recruiter at Texas Women's College in Denton, which I can tell you from experience of Denton, not of being a CIA recruiter, is not what you call a glamour job. It starts forging documents and, making fake driver's licenses. And then they find Lee Harvey Oswald and realize, oh, we have a perfect patsy here already. We don't need to make up this person. Well, I always sort of assumed that Win Everett was kind of an authorial surrogate for DeLillo. That DeLillo here is, commenting on the method of historical reconstruction itself, especially for a novel as opposed to, a supposedly factual book, how much you have to make up, how much, not falsification exactly, but extrapolation from the given materials is involved. But on this last reading, I noticed something odd, that Win Everett is referred to as having been CIA station chief in Guatemala City in 1954, which of course was the year of the CIA coup against Jacobo Arbenz that we've talked about several times. And I thought, that's a weirdly specific detail to include about a patently fictional character. He is fictional, right? No, as it turns out. Win Everett's not particularly fictional. I went and found out who was a CIA station chief in Guatemala City in 1954, and it was a guy named Birch O'Neill who almost perfectly lines up with Win Everett. Birch O'Neill came up through the CIA as the assistant to James Jesus Angleton. I believe it's James Jesus Angleton, both because he was half Mexican and because if his name was James Jesus Angleton, that is the most insufferably fucking blue-blooded Ivy League thing I've ever heard, and I can't say it out loud. James Jesus Angleton was one of the very early architects of the CIA and was particularly concerned with planting moles in other intelligence agencies and with sniffing out moles in our own. Right around the same time, incidentally, that Lee Harvey Oswald would have been going into Russia. If you remember the movie The Good Shepherd, it's 2006, I think. It's Matt Damon. I think Robert De Niro actually directed it. It's a fairly shitty movie, but the character Matt Damon plays in that movie is based on James Jesus Angleton. This, fucking Yale poet manqué. That's what he wanted to do. He ran the Yale poetry magazine, Furioso, and he was in correspondence with Ezra Pound and T.S. Eliot and E.E. Cummings and William Carlos Williams. And then, naturally, because this is very normal, was the chief of CIA counterintelligence from 1954 to 1975, during which, any number of absolutely atrocious things happened. And not implausible at all that he would have been in some kind of contact with Oswald at some point, given his remit in trying to place moles in rival intelligence agencies, specifically because Birch O'Neill was his right-hand man. Birch O'Neill's files have been made public or leaked, I don't know, and it's amazing how unredacted they are. Either someone wanted us to know about Birch O'Neill or someone really fucked up in the editing process. But one of the things that Birch O'Neill's file confirms is that the CIA had been using Lee Harvey Oswald for counterintelligence operations since at least, or rather I should say at latest, 1959, before he was in the Soviet Union, because Birch O'Neill's file included what is called an OS file on Oswald. OS is the CIA Office of Security, and an OS file is basically internal review. It's spying on the spies. At the time, that was Birch O'Neill's job. He kept tabs on spies for James Jesus Angleton. There is absolutely no reason that Lee Harvey Oswald would have an OS file, an internal review file, in 1959 unless he were already CIA. It's proof as incontrovertible as there could be. Other than, I don't know, George H.W. Bush literally buying TV time to confess that, yes, Oswald was a CIA agent. And George H.W. Bush is a melted wreck of a human being now. And I have to say, as far as poetic justice goes, he'll never get what he deserves, but being forced to decompose on live TV is a pretty decent comeuppance for him. So these are the two things I want you to remember. The Warren Commission, that Oswald was a CIA asset as of December 1960, and then even more importantly, Birch O'Neill had an internal review file on CIA asset Lee Harvey Oswald circa 1959. And this is kind of a side note, but the thing about Win Everett in Libra building up a fake dossier for a patsy, not made up. The CIA had a program to build fake dossiers for patsies since at latest, 1961. And this meant both building trails of documentary evidence for people who never existed, and building fake trails for real people. And just to confirm the Oswald CIA connection, before I get to Oswald's, life in a chronological sense, I want to tell you about the very odd case of a man named Richard Case Nagel. Richard Case Nagel, ostensibly a military guy, that's what, if you pulled his service records, they would say. He was also CIA while serving in the military. And as a CIA agent, he was embedded in the KGB as a mole. And the KGB got word right before the Kennedy assassination that Kennedy was going to be assassinated. And they knew that the CIA was going to do it. And again, I'm always referring you to James W. Douglas, but you want to know more about this, go read his book. So Richard Case Nagel, who is supposedly KGB but actually CIA, thinks, holy fucking shit, the CIA is going to kill the president? And he hears the name Oswald attached to this rumor. And Nagel has said that he knew as early as 1959 that Oswald was CIA and that his defection was fake, that he was actually a secret agent. I mean, who would know better than this guy? So Nagel, a few months before the assassination, gets himself arrested in a fake bank robbery because he has two goals here, basically. Number one, he wants the chance to get the attention of, significant amounts of law enforcement. And number two, he wants to be in jail in case Kennedy gets killed, so no one can say he had anything to do with it. So he gets arrested, and he tells the cops, look, I was never going to rob this bank. I did this to get you out here because I know something about John Kennedy being killed. And he, in September 1963, works his way up the ladder and has an interview with J. Edgar Hoover and tells Hoover that A, Kennedy is going to get killed, B, the CIA will do it, and C, Lee Harvey Oswald will be involved in this in some way. J. Edgar Hoover completely ignores him. None of this is in the Warren Commission. And no one talked to or about Nagel until 1995, until someone trying to reopen the case on the Kennedy assassination got Nagel to agree to testify. The next day, he died of a heart attack, and when they found him, his house was ransacked, and every file or tape having anything to do with the Kennedy assassination had been stolen. You may be starting to notice a lot of fortuitous heart attacks. Make of that what you will. So anyway, we have it as clear as it could be. Oswald was CIA from 59 onward, and other people knew it. So, Oswald, let's get to him in a more straightforward biographical sense. He was born in New Orleans in 1939. His dad was dead by the time he was born. He had an older brother named Robert, who's about 5 years older. And if you stop and think for a second, brother named Robert, his name was Lee, his dad's name was also Robert, Robert Lee. Yes, they were indeed both named after Robert E. Lee. Reactionary politics are a long-term trend in the Oswald family. He was in New Orleans as a little kid. He spent his kind of early adolescence in the Bronx, a little bit of it in Fort Worth, and then eventually returned to New Orleans as a teenager. Went to 12 different schools. He was in a boys' home at one point. He, while in New York, cut class too many times and was taken in for a psych evaluation that found him basically normal. His, IQ tests are bullshit in any number of ways, but people have tried to make the case that, Oswald was some sort of, mental defective. He was not that. His IQ was tested at 103 when he was a teenager. He had a perfectly normally functioning mind. He was not a psychopath. The only real mental deficiency, and this isn't even a mental deficiency, that Oswald had, he was profoundly dyslexic. He really struggled to read, and he was an awful speller. In the late 1940s, early 1950s, they hadn't yet developed the what you would call the taxonomic sensitivity to say, oh, this is a bright kid. There's something wrong with his mind. Reading doesn't work for him. Writing doesn't work for him. It's not because he's stupid. It's just a disability. No, they saw what a hard time he had reading and how awful he was at writing and concluded, oh, he's an idiot. He was not an idiot. He if anything, was a little bit brighter than average. Various people involved in the assassination plot, their description of Oswald is pretty much all the same. That he was real quiet and real shy and sort of, poked around the edges of conversations, but that every once in a while you would get him talking and he could talk circles around you about history and politics. Knew all kinds of shit. Not a stupid man. Later, much later, Oswald would claim that as a teenager in New Orleans, and this is the second time he's lived in New Orleans, he got interested in Marxism around the time he was 15 and became a dedicated Marxist-Leninist. His best friend during this period was a guy named Edward Vobel, and he called that, and I quote, a lot of baloney, and said that Oswald read the same paperback trash all the rest of them did. It seems pretty clear from subsequent events that what Oswald was doing was trying to put, Marxism much further back in his past than it actually was to, well, you'll see why. You'll see why that's important to his cover. The thing we do know for sure that he was reading at this time, and reading obsessively, was the Marine Corps Handbook. And I don't know about you, who can unriddle the folds of the human brain, but I don't know a whole lot of dedicated teenage Marxists who are also really excited at the thought of becoming Marines and going to murder people on behalf of the United States. But Lee Oswald really wanted to be a goddamn Marine. His brother, 5 years older, as I've said, was a Marine, and Lee desperately wanted to follow him. So at 17, he lies about his age to get into the Marines. This is 1956 now. And goes through any number of training courses. And finally, in August 1957, is sent to work as a radar operator at Naval Air Facility Atsugi in Japan. Oddly enough, it's not actually in Atsugi, Japan. It's near Atsugi, Japan. But the name of it is Naval Air Facility Atsugi. Now, Atsugi is not just any air base. And just the fact that Oswald was sent there, that in itself is a tell. Atsugi, number one, was well known even to the people who worked there as basically a front for CIA activities in Japan. There were CIA people swarming all over the fucking place. Number two, it was the site of a number of MKUltra LSD experiments ordered and supervised by the CIA. And number three, and most importantly, remember what I said about Richard Bissell earlier, that he directed personally the U-2 spy plane program? Well, Naval Air Facility Atsugi was the base of the U-2 spy plane program, which was being run by the CIA. And for a long time, you couldn't get anyone to admit that. They'd say, no, the U-2 spy plane was a product of Lockheed Industries. And now you look it up and it just admits, no, the U-2 was a CIA project that was accomplished via Lockheed. So Oswald, of all the places he could go in the world, goes to a place crawling with CIA and being used extensively for CIA experiments, both in, interrogation and torture, and in extreme experimental aviation. The U-2 was like the most top secret project of the CIA in 1957. It did not get more secret. And Oswald, of all things, is a radar operator, right? So he can hardly help but notice at least some data about the U-2 when it's at the same base. I mean, part of the reason the U-2 was important was that it could attain altitudes that were thought impossible for a craft of that description. I think the scientific consensus at the time was that, in an airplane like that, you couldn't go higher than like mid 60,000s feet, and the U-2 could get to 80, could get to 90, and could take photographs that, to quote one person who worked near it, and this is obviously an exaggeration, but the line I've heard is you could take it from 300 miles away and it would look like it was right in front of your hand. Don't take that literally, but extremely detailed, accurate photographs from an extremely long distance. It is not a goddamn coincidence that Lee Harvey Oswald is at this place of all places, and I think there is every reason in the world to assume that it was while stationed at Naval Air Facility Atsugi that he was first approached to get involved with the CIA. Remember the whole thing about him being a fake teenage Marxist? Well, in 1958, he did suddenly start talking about Marx very ostentatiously. Suddenly started learning little bits of Russian and going off about socialism all the time to his fellow Marines who were not amused, almost as if to establish some kind of background. And we have this testimony from a guy named Jim Wilcott, who worked at the finance branch of the Atsugi CIA station from 1960 to 1964. So he and Oswald weren't there at the same time, but he's talking about this later after Oswald is known as, the quote-unquote JFK assassin. And Wilcott says, quote, "It was common knowledge in the Tokyo CIA station that Oswald worked for the agency. He had been trained at Atsugi Naval Air Station, a plush super-secret cover base for Tokyo Station's special operations. Oswald was recruited from the military for the express purpose of becoming a double agent on assignment to the USSR. More than once, I was told something like, 'Oh, so-and-so was working on the Oswald project back in the 50s, end quote. It's all over the fucking place. We really don't need to belabor the point anymore about Lee Harvey Oswald being CIA. And two odd things then happen in Oswald's Marine tenure. The first is that he shoots himself in the arm with a non-regulation weapon. And he doesn't end up getting court-martialed for this, but he later gets court-martialed for getting in a fight with a superior officer and has to do some time in the brig. Those who have, tried to make Oswald out to be this, frenetic, desperate, indecisive, stupid, child of chance, have seen him shooting himself in the arm as, oh, fuck, I shouldn't have joined the Marines. This is bad, man. It seems to me a lot more like an attempt to get out of the rest of his Marine term and go to work on the CIA assignment he's already been given. An idea which is more than reinforced by the next odd thing that happened to him as a Marine. September 11th, 1959, he gets a hardship discharge from the Marines for, and this is their reasoning, care of his mother. This is the kind of thing they give you if you have, say, some sort of dependent who's desperately ill and you're the only one who could possibly take care of them. Lee Harvey Oswald's mother was not sick. Lee Harvey Oswald's mother was working around the goddamn clock just to try to keep herself fed. It's not as if the Marines wouldn't look into this sort of thing before just giving a guy a hardship discharge. It's not easy to get discharged from the Marines, for fuck's sake. So the fact that he got a hardship discharge to go care for a non-existent, desperately ill mother suggests to me that the shooting thing, maybe it was his idea, maybe it was the CIA's idea, who knows, but it fucked up. And then because it fucked up, the CIA went to the Marines and said, hey, you gotta let this guy go. So Oswald goes home for a little while, basically just a month or so, from September 11th, 1959 onward. And then he goes to the USSR. And there is all kinds of sideways bullshit about this, all of which makes much more sense in retrospect when you know he was a CIA asset as far back as 58, 59. So Oswald leaves the country with the very, very vague plan. He's telling people that he's going to go to college in Finland for some reason. He gets to Finland, and in Helsinki has absolutely no trouble getting a visa to enter the Soviet Union. That doesn't make any fucking sense. The fact that a former Marine with radar training, and particularly radar training at the base where the U-2 project was being conducted, that guy just gets waved through. That doesn't make any sense for the Russians, who immediately thought, once he actually got there, oh, this dude's a spy. But it especially doesn't make any fucking sense for the United States, because their thought should be, is this a defector who's going to spill military secrets? Unless, of course, they already knew he was CIA. So he gets to Moscow, October 59, and tells the American embassy there that he is renouncing his citizenship, and that he wants to become a Soviet citizen. Tells that to the Soviets too. On October 21st, the Soviets officially sent him word, no, sorry, you can't just become a citizen like that. You have basically the rest of the day to get your shit together and get out of the Soviet Union. Because, of course, they thought, this motherfucker is a spy. He comes from the American military, an extremely sensitive project in the American military, and they just wave him through the whole visa process. No, we're not letting him stay here. I'm sorry, I said October 20th. No, it was October 20th. Pardon me, I'm getting dates confused here. So, on that day, the day they tell him he can't stay, Oswald commits what the official story will have you believe was a suicide attempt. And they will say, oh, fear of what was going to happen to him if he went home after trying to be a Soviet defector, or despair over the failure of his plans, or regret over having gone. Bullshit. Oswald gave himself a wound exactly serious enough to get him sent to the hospital, but nowhere near serious enough to actually endanger his life. He didn't so much cut his wrist as cut his forearm sort of up to his wrist. And remember, this was a guy with all kinds of fucking Marine training about the various tolerances of violence of which the human body is capable. It seems pretty clear to me that what Oswald did was wound himself just seriously enough that they would have to put him in a hospital and put him under observation, at least for a little while, and that maybe while he was in the hospital, they would reconsider his request to stay in the Soviet Union. And that is what happened. They put him in a hospital, they put him under observation. October 31st, he goes to the U.S. Embassy. He says he is through with America and knows military secrets that he plans to divulge to the Soviets. And then is debriefed by the KGB and tells them what he wants to do is go to college in Moscow. And they, of course, are still extremely and rightly wary of him and say, yeah, maybe not that. How about working at a factory? So he gets sent to be a lathe operator in the Gorizont electronics factory in Minsk, in what is now Belarus and back then was the Belarusian Soviet Socialist Republic. About, 6 months later, March 1961, meets a girl named Marina Prusakova, marries her 6 weeks after meeting her. Maybe they were, immediately in love, blah, blah, blah. That's possible. I'm not discounting that. I also wouldn't discount the idea that he was told, get married while you're there. Marry the first girl who will have you. In fact, he had already proposed to another girl by this point, because they will give you access to, the inner workings and inner sort of chat of Soviet society in a way you can never have as a single man. And plus, if you have to come back here, then this wife will give you immediate access to the Soviet exile community. And they are married, as I say, 6 weeks after they meet in April of 61. In February of 62, they have a daughter named June. And they decide in May 1962 that, Belarusia and the lathe factory, or the lathe operating at the electronics factory, and this isn't the life for Lee, Marina, and June. So May 62, we want to go back to the U.S. Now, this should have been an international fucking incident. Not just because here is a defector who said he was going to, disclose military secrets to the Soviet Union, and at this point has been living there for 2.5 years, but because of a very specific thing. Oswald, as I have not failed to mention, worked in very close proximity to the U-2 spy plane project. Well, in May 1960, the Soviet Union shot down a U-2 plane. It was a U-2 out on a CIA run piloted by a guy named Francis Gary Powers, and it was shot in May 60 over a city that a long time ago was called Yekaterinburg, and during the Soviet period was called Sverdlovsk, and is now called Yekaterinburg again. Okay, so think about this. Guy with knowledge of the U-2 program defects to Soviet Union. In, say, late October, early November 59, is debriefed by KGB. 7-8 months later, depending on how you count it, the USSR shoots down a fucking U-2. All right? This is what you need to bear in mind when I tell you that Lee and his Belarusian wife and his child have no trouble getting back into the United States. Not only do they have no trouble getting back to the United States, the U.S. Embassy gives them a $435 repatriation loan, which I believe is something in the range of like maybe $3,500 in modern money. He gets back into the United States with his new family without even press appearing at the fucking boat when he lands in June 62. Not a word from any official agency. If this guy were anything but CIA, all right, the only way he would get back into the United States is as a prisoner awaiting trial for fucking treason and espionage. The clear inference to be drawn here is that he gave the Russians secrets that helped them down a U-2 spy plane, the most secret CIA project of the time. It makes zero fucking sense at all that he would be let back in, period, at the height of the Cold War, let alone let back in with no problem, let alone let back in with money and his family. It is mind-boggling that anyone ever expected us to believe that. The CIA explanation is the only thing that makes the least fucking bit of sense. It is astonishing that they thought this was going to work, that they could just lie about this. Although, then again, not that astonishing, is it? because it worked for years and fucking years. And by the time anyone looked into it, it was far too late to do anything about it. But if nothing else, if you're skeptical of the documentation of his work for the CIA, of the other people's testimony of his work for the CIA, the fact that he got back into this country after the USSR shot down a U-2 plane while he was there, that should tell you something is fucking wrong here. That was, I think, the first real piece of evidence I ever encountered. And from then on, Jesus Christ, I knew I was on the trail of something, right? So, June 62 to April 63, Oswald and his family around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's where they return. And he and his wife they had both another child and a number of marital problems. So sometimes they lived together, sometimes they lived separately. The most important thing for political purposes here is that Oswald's entire life in the DFW area is CIA connected. Marina introduces him to the Soviet and more generally Eastern European exile community then extant around DFW. And who becomes Oswald's closest friend in that group but a fellow named George de Mohrenschildt, except his name isn't actually George de Mohrenschildt. His name is Jerzy Sergius von Mohrenschildt. He is one of the stranger figures in American history. Jerzy Sergius von Mohrenschildt was born in Mosir, Belarus. Hey, how about that? Although it was then Russia, in 1911. His front cover was that he was a petroleum geologist, and he was a petroleum geologist. He was also a CIA asset. He did CIA and petroleum work in Haiti, in Venezuela, working for a company called Pantepec Oil, which belonged to the family of fucking William F. Buckley, in Costa Rica, in Yugoslavia. Our Mr. Mohrenschildt also had allegations of Nazi ties during World War II, possibly via anti-communists among the white Russians. And he gave this completely bizarre story about ascertaining property values in the United States so Nazis could stash their money in property, but only then so he could then go to the French and tell them the Nazis are willing to pay this, so you better pay more, only to stop the Nazis from stashing their money here. Right, okay, fuck off. That's just a lie. George de Mohrenschildt also, weirdly enough, one of his sort of dalliances, I don't know if they were ever a couple, but they were certainly a long-term flirtation, was the mother of one Jacqueline Bouvier, later to be Jackie Kennedy. And in 1962, a DFW area agent for the CIA named J. Walton Moore goes to George de Mohrenschildt, who he knows well as an agency asset from way back, and gives him an address and says, hey, here's this guy. He just moved back to Fort Worth. You should go be friends with him. So that's what de Mohrenschildt does. He is Oswald's confidant at the time. Later, after the assassination, both he and his wife will insist that Oswald was a patsy, that he sure may have been involved in the plan to kill Kennedy, but that he definitely didn't shoot Kennedy himself. And of all the bizarre deaths that attend people who were going to try to tell the truth about this, de Mohrenschildt's is possibly the eeriest and weirdest. In 1977, he is contacted by Gaiton Fonzi of the House Select Committee on Assassinations about testifying, and he agrees to testify. He dies the same day, and the official cause is suicide. He's found in a chair with a gun, shot in the head. But what is bizarre about the suicide is that there were other people in his house when it supposedly happened. No one heard him shoot himself, but at least one person heard the sound of strange footsteps running out of the house. And it was actually the sound of the running that alerted them to check on whether George was okay. Here's a place where I'm going to theorize and guess and conjecture, all right? He was fucking murdered. That's my guess. But George de Mohrenschildt wasn't the only CIA-related person, place, or thing that Oswald was involved with in the DFW. Oh, no. If, again, you read the official or superficial biography, he kicked around from job to job. What you won't read about a lot of those jobs was that they were with CIA fronts, most prominently with a graphic design firm that did blow up and retouch work on reconnaissance photos for the CIA. He was still a CIA employee. But the jobs don't last, things keep turning over. And eventually, a friend of his, this is actually a little bit out of order. Let me get back to this later. I should say he has another friend than George de Mohrenschildt, a woman named Ruth Payne. Ruth, arguably as much Marina's friend as Lee's. Sometimes when they're fighting, Marina and the kid or kids, depending on when it is, will go over and stay at Ruth Payne's place. Well, Ruth Payne's dad was an employee of USAID. His name was William Avery Hyde. USAID is well known as a CIA front, and there are CIA documents discussing him specifically. Ruth Payne's ex-husband, Michael Payne, worked for Bell Helicopter, which is a CIA front. Michael Payne's mother, Ruth Forbes Payne, dated Alan Dulles while Dulles was in the OSS. Ruth Payne's sister, Sylvia Hyde Hoke, was listed as a CIA employee in Falls Church, Virginia, in the town directory for 1961. Ruth Payne's entire life is saturated with CIA shit. So his only two close contacts during this period, de Mohrenschildt and Payne, both have fucking CIA all over them. He does have another contact, although not a close one, an FBI agent named James Hosty, with whom he tries to get in contact a number of times. And though this is jumping ahead a little bit, one of the least known facts about the JFK assassination is that on the night of November 17th, 1963, there suddenly appeared an anonymous FBI-wide telex message. Every FBI telex machine in the country saying JFK is going to die in Dallas. 5 fucking days before the assassination. Every FBI bureau, every FBI office with a telex machine got this message. All right? It was completely ignored. And I think for that reason, among others, it would be very reasonable to suspect that J. Edgar Hoover had at least some inkling of what was going to happen to Kennedy, even if he didn't know the precise details, and that he didn't give a shit and was perfectly content to let it happen. And I'll give you another piece of evidence when we get to the day after the assassination. That FBI-wide telex, we're never going to know who sent that, but given Oswald's contact with this guy James Hosty, and given the other evidence that he was beginning to realize that he might be the patsy for the Kennedy assassination, like the fact that a certain Lee was the one who called in the tip on the November 2nd plot in Chicago. Again, I'm not saying I know this. I'm saying it makes sense that Lee Harvey Oswald, via James Hosty, was the one who sent that FBI telex that then got completely ignored. So April 1963, Oswald separates from his family, takes off for a while to go to New Orleans. And in New Orleans, by daytime, he's working at a coffee company and on the street handing out leaflets for the Fair Play for Cuba committee, thing I was joking about in the intro. The address stamped on those leaflets, if you want to know more about the Fair Play for Cuba committee, was 544 Camp Street, New Orleans. At 544 Camp Street were gathered a group of people whose presence would be awfully fucking difficult to reconcile with any kind of Marxist convictions at all. Because 544 Camp was the detective's office of one Guy Bannister, one of the most twisted, evil old fucks this country has ever produced. He was an FBI agent from 1934 to 1954. I believe he was even peripherally involved in the John Dillinger killing. He was a member of the John Birch Society. He was a Minuteman. He was incredibly racist. He had delirious fantasies about armies of red Chinese soldiers secretly massing in Baja California. 1955, he was briefly the assistant superintendent of New Orleans police, and his specialty was investigating campus leftism. But he was dismissed after 6 months for getting into an argument in a bar and firing his gun into the ceiling. He was a CIA asset from then on, if not before, and probably during the whole investigating campus leftist period. Major nexus between the CIA and the mafia for arms, money, and drugs, all used either to fund or to establish or to arm the illegal anti-Castro paramilitary groups that were training in places like the Louisiana Swamp. In fact, he ran one of the training camps in that Louisiana Swamp as early as 1959. And his detective's office was a massive stockpile of right-wing hate literature and of weapons, secret weapons that he had been running via the CIA, via the mafia, via the Cubans, whoever, rifles, bombs, all kinds of shit. Okay, so the other frequent visitor to Guy Bannister's office is David Ferry. And man, I talk about George de Mohrenschildt as weird, but David Ferry is just so helplessly fucking bizarre. He was a pilot who grew up wanting to be a priest. He got fired from, I believe it was American Airlines, for being a pedophile. He had alopecia, and instead of trying to hide the fact that he had alopecia or to look, like normal, he enjoyed emphasizing the fact that he had alopecia. So he would wear like an incredibly fake wig and like mohair patches for his eyebrows. He was obsessed with the idea that he had cancer and conducted amateur cancer research on mice and rats and all kinds of rodents. He claimed to be an authority on hypnotism and to have corresponded through the mail with the greatest European masters of hypnotism. He was one of the weirdest goddamn people who's ever lived. And of course, as a known pedophile, they let him be the captain of the Civil Air Patrol, which is kind of like a militarist or more militarist version of the Boy Scouts. And who was in his New Orleans Civil Air Patrol chapter but the young Lee Harvey Oswald, in addition to the young Charles Frederick Rogers, but we haven't even gotten anywhere near Charles Frederick Rogers yet. And, of course, Ferry is a CIA asset. He does short plane runs for the CIA. Given the circumstances, I think it would be fair to conjecture that he was probably involved in some of the Mexico to the U.S. drug trafficking that helped fund those anti-Castro camps. He certainly showed up at the anti-Castro camps. And there was this incident in which, it's a complicated story, but there's a mob boss named Carlos Marcello. He was the head of the New Orleans Mafia around this time. He was actually born in Tunisia, but faked having a faked being Guatemalan, rather, I should say, in order then to get a visa to enter the United States. And Bobby Kennedy, in his crusade to fuck with organized crime, realized all this and had Carlos Marcello deported to Guatemala in April of 1961. Supposedly, David Ferry is the one who personally flew Marcello back to New Orleans in February of 1962. And this is just speculation, but a child molester runs a paramilitary group for adolescent boys, two of whom, Lee Harvey Oswald and the guy we haven't talked about yet, Chuck Rogers, are later involved in the plot to kill the president. I don't know, that sounds kind of like conditioning to me. I'm not saying conditioning to help kill the president in 10 years. He didn't know he was going to do that. I'm just saying conditioning in general. Oh, fuck. Well, I've gotten this a little bit out of order, but I should mention, too, the supposed story, well, the real story, that supposedly Lee Harvey Oswald attempted to kill the phenomenally right-wing General Edwin Walker during his stint in the DFW before he went back to New Orleans. I have no idea whether that's real or not. I haven't been able to find any particularly good research sources about it. I wouldn't be surprised if it was real and then it was sort of a, not so much a training mission for the JFK thing as a further attempt to establish his left-wing credentials, like handing out the Fair Play for Cuba leaflets, or going on New Orleans radio and TV in '63, which he actually did do, to defend Marxism-Leninism, not communism, but Marxism-Leninism. You know, taking a pot shot at Edwin Walker. That would be the kind of thing that would help build up your dossier when they eventually want to pin the Kennedy assassination on you. I also wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't him at all. The answer to that is that I just don't know. But New Orleans, I take it I have established that he, though ostensibly being a leftist firebrand there, is associating almost exclusively with the furthest right of CIA-connected ghouls, and particularly people involved with the Bay of Pigs and the various illegal anti-Castro missions since then. And then the very end of September and the very beginning of October, we get into the weirdest period in Lee Harvey Oswald's life. Weirder even than the whole CIA-Russia thing, because it's almost impossible to say what exactly happened here. Late September of 1963, Oswald somehow gets from New Orleans to a Mexico-bound bus out of Houston. Nobody knows how he got there, and nobody knows whether or not he actually went to Mexico. He, in quotation marks, and you'll see why I say that in a moment, allegedly told other people on the bus that he was headed to Cuba via Mexico. All right, so somehow New Orleans to Houston, somehow Houston to allegedly Mexico, but there's no proof he was ever actually in Mexico. What makes this tremendously eerie is that there were, at this moment, at least two fake Lee Harvey Oswalds doing provocative shit that would be put in his dossier by the CIA as eventual background corroboration of his political tendencies and why he might want to murder John Kennedy. There's at least one in the DFW area. Several different events here. One of them is a guy goes to a car dealership, introduces himself, is careful to introduce himself as Lee Oswald. Here's the thing, Lee Harvey Oswald couldn't fucking drive. Tells the guy at the dealership he wants to test drive a car. Drives it, the guy at the dealership would later note, recklessly quickly, like 80 miles an hour. Then takes the car back to the dealership, asks how much it is. Guy tells him, I think it was $8,000. And he says, oh, too much. I'd probably do better in Soviet Russia. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, guy goes to a shooting range, and the guy next to him keeps shooting at his target, the first guy's target. And eventually he turns to him and says, what the hell, buddy? I paid for that. And guy next to him says, oh, sorry I kept shooting it. I guess I must have thought it was John Kennedy. Hi, my name's Lee Harvey Oswald. Number three, goes to a gun store with a rifle. Says, hi, I'm Lee Harvey Oswald, and I need a scope mounted on this rifle. Oswald was documentably and provably not in the Dallas-Fort Worth area when any of this shit happened. We don't know who these people were. There is a guess as to who one of them was, and I'll tell you about that guy next time. God, a story to rival David Ferry's in terms of strangeness. But none of those people, whether it was 1, 2, or 3 people, was fucking Lee Harvey Oswald. And then the matter of this whole Mexico City trip. The official story, again, is that Oswald went to Mexico City to go to the Soviet embassy and the Cuban consulate to try to secure himself passage first to Cuba, and if not Cuba, then to Soviet Russia for after he killed Kennedy. This is the official rationale for his behavior. 2 things about this, though. Number one, the FBI had what was called a flash warning on Lee Harvey Oswald. Flash warnings go out to all kinds of government bureaus all over the world, and basically they just mean, if this guy comes in, you tell us immediately. Well, the FBI for 4 years had a flash warning on Lee Harvey Oswald, and they mysteriously, and for no reason anyone can explain, canceled it just before his trip to Mexico City. The other thing is this. The Oswalds coming out of both the Cuban consulate and the Soviet embassy were photographed. There are surveillance photos of both of them, and they are absolutely, unequivocally not Lee Harvey Oswald. And I don't mean there's a chance that they're not. I don't mean the photos are grainy and you can't tell. I encourage you, go Google right now Lee Harvey Oswald Cuban consulate and Lee Harvey Oswald Soviet embassy. The guy coming out of the Soviet embassy is a big, burly, square-faced, broad-shouldered man. He's middle-aged. He has a bald patch on the back of his head. Oswald was a shrimpy little guy, balding from the front. Looked absolutely nothing like this fucking dude. And the guy at the Cuban consulate was a blonde man with thick hair, maybe 30, wearing a suit. Looks remarkably like a young Jimmy Carter, thick lips. Again, absolutely nothing like Lee Harvey Oswald. They are unequivocally not fucking him. So both the Dallas incidents and the Mexico City incidents are clearly being set up to provide more background information that will suggest Oswald had a motive to kill the president, right? So Oswald, wherever the fuck he's been, we'll never even know whether he was in Mexico City. There's a chance, in fact, he did go to the Cuban embassy, and that's how the KGB got the tip that Kennedy was going to be killed, that Richard Case Nagel ended up hearing about and trying to act on. That may have been why he was there. I have no idea. I don't think anyone has any idea. But wherever the fuck he was He goes back to Dallas in October 1963. And you remember Ruth Payne, the woman whose entire family is in the CIA? Her father, her ex-husband, her sister, all CIA. Well, she comes to Lee and says, "Hey, Lee, funny thing, a job on the upper floor of a warehouse just opened up." And this was October 14th, 1963, just over a month before the shooting. And the warehouse she's talking about is, of course, the book depository. We know because of the Chicago plot to kill Kennedy, of course, that a shot from a window of a warehouse, or rather, a patsy who was allegedly shooting from a window of a warehouse, was a key constituent of that plot, right? Oswald is clearly being fucking set up here. This is clearly the attempts to get him in position. Not least because when Ruth Payne got him this job, Kennedy's campaign route on the visit to Dallas on November 22nd was not scheduled to go down Elm Street past the book depository. They changed that route later, after Oswald had the job. Okay, bear that in mind. Now, one thing it feels like we should address at this point, questions of testimony. You know, all this proof, all this evidence, and especially testimony just before the shooting. You know, people tend to ask, well, if all this is out there, why didn't anyone come forward? Well, people did try to come forward. There is a case, and I really should have a note for this. Oh, I'm sorry, I do have a note for that. That's later. Let me get to a different case, actually. A showgirl named Beverly Oliver tried to tell... let me correct that. Sorry, it's we're deep into this one. Beverly Oliver did not give her testimony in court because she was very reasonably afraid of being killed. But she worked Jack Ruby's club, the Carousel, on occasion, and swore that she had seen Oswald, Ruby, and David Ferry at the Carousel Club before the Kennedy assassination. The official story that the Warren Commission wants to peddle is that Oswald and Ruby had never met each other, had nothing to do with each other. Bullshit. So this is one reason why you didn't hear. Beverly Oliver, people like her, they knew, they were terrified to say anything. Then there are the examples of why they were terrified to say anything. A woman named Rose, I think Rose Cherami, I'm not sure how she actually said her name. She used to strip at a club that Jack Ruby owned. And 2 days before the assassination, November 20th, she went to the police and said she had seen Oswald with these two guys who she recognized, Sergio Arcacha Smith and Emiliano Santana. They were both CIA-connected Cuban exiles involved with the Bay of Pigs, with Operation Mongoose, with Alpha 66. And Sergio Arcacha Smith, in particular, was tight with David Ferry and Guy Bannister. The FBI wouldn't listen to Rose Cherami, and the Warren Commission wouldn't listen. And she died in one of the more horrifying ways I've ever heard of. Not so much because of the violence. There are more violent ways to die than this, but because of the amount of planning that went into it. 2 years later, after she had tried to tell the Warren Commission that 2 days before the murder, she saw, and let me correct my ambiguous grammar from earlier. I'm not saying she testified 2 days before the murder. I'm saying that she later testified that 2 days before the murder she saw Oswald with Sergio Arcacha Smith and Emiliano Santana. Sorry, I was ambiguous about that before. No one listens. 2 years later, outside a place called Big Sandy, Texas, a guy is driving on the highway and sees something weird in the distance. It's luggage and the luggage is arranged in a kind of quarter circle. So, like, there's one briefcase at the right edge of the highway, and then one a little further on to the left, and then a little further on to the left. You see, making, 1/4 of a circle from one side of the road, rather, to the other. And arranged in a pretty tight curve. So he has to slam on the brakes and turn very quickly to the left to avoid running over all this shit, right? Except the last thing in the curve isn't a suitcase. It's Rose Cherami's head. Body's still attached, but not after the car. And the bizarre thing is that when they took Rose Cherami into the hospital, well, maybe more morgue than hospital, they found in the remaining part of her head, she had actually been shot in the head already and then set up on the highway like this. So she was dead, and they set up this plan to have someone run over her head in order to make the shooting untraceable, to destroy all the evidence that it might have left, which is fucking bizarre beyond words. I mean, in the most brutal terms, why not just run over her head yourself? Why fucking leave this thing to chance? It's something that has haunted me for a year now. And of course, if you were to go trying to look for her autopsy now, they would tell you it's lost. And of course, someone tried to have her exhumed, and the Texas police wouldn't let them. So, a couple concrete examples of, concrete answers, rather, to the question people always ask: why didn't anyone come forward? All right, now, I'm going to get to the actual shooting itself, the day of the shooting, in the next episode. So this is going to be a little bit of disjunction here. But we're going to actually skip the shooting for now. And I'm going to tell you about Oswald after the shooting. The official story, some of you probably know, is that he is seen walking around his neighborhood, or rather the neighborhood of his boarding house. A police officer named J.D. Tippit stops him because he's, acting sketchy in a neighborhood right next to the place where the president just got murdered. He and Tippit have a verbal argument. Oswald shoots Tippit. Then he runs into the Texas Theater, a movie theater, jumps the turnstile, doesn't pay. So the cops, the owner of the theater calls the cops. The cops come and get Oswald. And then Oswald is connected to the Tippit murder and then the Kennedy assassination. This does not fucking hold together at all. Not least because the cartridges bagged at the scene of Tippit's murder do not match the bullets that were found at Tippit's body. It was, I believe, a mix of Remingtons and Winchesters in terms of ammunition. And god damn it, I can't recall the exact ratio of which to which, but the shell casings found at the scene were 3 of one kind, 1 of another. The bullets found in J.D. Tippit were 2 of one kind, 2 of the other. It was a doctored scene. It was fucking faked. And there are patrons of the Texas Theater who tried to testify to the fact that Oswald was already in the theater by the time Tippit was shot. A time they might well have recognized because Oswald walked in the middle of a movie, so, everyone would have turned back to the guy letting the light in the doors. They might very well remember that hour. If that's true, no need to jump the turnstile, so no reason to call the cops. And why, for that matter, even if it's true that he jumped the turnstile and the owner called the cops on him, it's probably not, but let's just say it is. Why the fuck does half the Dallas police force come in there and try to wrestle him to the ground? Well, because Oswald was set up. Because he was almost certainly going to the Texas Theater because that was his prearranged rendezvous point with David Atlee Phillips, his CIA control agent or handler. And that unbeknownst to him, Phillips was never going to show because he was giving Oswald up to serve as the patsy for the Kennedy assassination. So Oswald is arrested, and just a couple little facts about Oswald's arrest that aren't normally widely disseminated because the story we have is Oswald's arrested and then Jack Ruby killed him. Very little about what happened between the arrest and the killing. Well, while he was in Dallas police custody, Oswald was given what's called a paraffin test. Paraffin wax soaks up contaminants from the pores of your skin. So, I mean, I have no idea if they still use this method, but in the 60s at least, what they used to do was dip or paint various parts of your body with paraffin wax, depending on the kind of gun you'd supposedly used and how you'd supposedly used it. And then when the wax dries, they would peel it off, and it would pick up various kinds of nitrates present in gunpowder. Potassium nitrate is the most common, but ammonium or sodium nitrate are sometimes used in cheaper gunpowders. So if Lee Harvey Oswald had killed Kennedy the way he is generally assumed to have killed Kennedy, right, imagine his physical position. He is looking out a window with a rifle up against his right cheek, his right eye pressed to the scope. Stock is either on top of or under his on top of his shoulder or under his armpit, depending on how he chose to fire it. Probably one hand on the barrel, other hand on the trigger. If he had fired that gun at all, let alone 3 times in 9 seconds, as he is alleged to have done, there would have been nitrate traces all over his cheeks, his neck, his shoulder, his collarbones, his hands, his forearms. Gunpowder fucking everywhere. That much contact with a gun held that close. What the actual nitrate test found was that paraffin test, was that the only traces of nitrate on Lee Harvey Oswald were to be found on the palms of his hands. And I'll explain this in more detail when we talk about the killing itself next time. That's because he had been picking up someone else's shell casings the day before. He had been out with someone else who was testing guns in a little shithole nowhere outside Mesquite, Texas. Not that Mesquite's not shithole nowhere enough on its own, believe me. And this guy was testing out different weapons, and Oswald was picking up the shells to make sure they didn't leave anything incriminating. That was why he had nitrates on the palms of his hands. That was the only place he had nitrates on the palms of his hands. And I'll get to the Jack Ruby stuff at the end of the next episode. But one little stinger here, or actually two. I have mentioned before that I don't know for sure whether J. Edgar Hoover or Lyndon B. Johnson had foreknowledge of the assassination in any specific way. I can easily believe that they both did. I don't have any proof. Although we do have proof. I mean, we know for a fact that someone tried to tell J. Edgar Hoover Kennedy is going to be killed in Dallas and Lee Harvey Oswald is going to be involved. Whether he took that seriously or not, I have no idea. What we do know is this. The day after Kennedy's assassination, so at this point, LBJ has been president for about 24 hours. Lyndon Johnson comes to him and just sort of lets slip that, hey, so you know that thing about Oswald at the Cuban consulate and the Soviet embassy in Mexico City? Well, we have photos of the men at the consulate and the embassy, and we also have their voice recordings from phone calls they made that day. And neither of the men and neither the photos nor the voice recordings match Oswald at all. And it would appear that the CIA had Oswald impersonators in Mexico City and incidentally in the Dallas-Fort Worth area when people identified as Oswald were seen doing provocative, flamboyant things while Oswald couldn't possibly have been present. Anyway, that was just an interesting thing I felt like telling you. Go on with your day. This being J. Edgar Hoover, one has to assume that he had been hoarding this evidence for a while, just in case the story about Dallas and Kennedy and some kind of Oswald and CIA involvement happened to be true. So I don't know if LBJ or J. Edgar Hoover knew before. Again, no trouble believing that they did, especially Hoover. What I do know is that they knew the day after the assassination that the official story was bullshit. Bullshit. That Oswald, however he was involved, was not the man he was being made out to be. And then the final stinger here, just on the Warren Commission. As I basically said at the beginning, don't waste your fucking time. Really, there's no need to spend any time thinking about the Warren Commission. I'll detail that some when I talk about Jack Ruby. But the two things that come to mind now is details of the Warren Commission. Number one, it is on the record that J. Edgar Hoover went to Earl Warren, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, head of the commission, before it started, and told him, you know what you have to find, right? You know, the fate of the world could very well rest on your delivering the verdict that we need you to deliver. So you know what you need to do, and you're going to do it, right? And Warren said, yeah, I do, and yes, I will. The other thing, the ideal place to close here, friends, having talked about him so much over the last few episodes, who was appointed to serve on the Warren Commission but Allen fucking Dulles, the head of the CIA whom Kennedy had fired, starting all of this. If that ain't a neat little, circular wrap up, I don't know what is. And next time we're going to talk about one reconstruction of the actual killing, the one that I happen to think is most reasonable. And as I've said, the vast majority of what I've just told you about Oswald is documented and documentable fact. The next one is going to go much more on a couple people's testimony, because that's the only way to get these stories, at the moment anyway. It will be the version of the killing that I find most trustworthy, because it most logically connects the most different threads, and because there is one piece of undoubtable physical evidence right at the fucking heart of it that no amount of thinking, can wish away. But we'll get to that next time. And to close, we're going to end with what will be a special treat for maybe one of you. Some tiny percentage of you may at some point have paid attention to the American noisy, dissonant, weird art rock scene. Bands that have 9-minute songs with 30 key changes in them and shit like that. And if you did pay attention to that music at any point, you might, even a tiny percentage of that, plebiscite, might remember a band called the Nerve Institute that put out a couple albums several years ago. One with the American branch of Chris Cutler's record label, Recommended, and two with the Italian label Alt Rock, and has been dormant since then. Well, in its dormancy, the Nerve Institute occasionally got requests to do event-specific music, and would occasionally comply with these requests. And at one point was asked to write a singer-songwritery thing that could be performed for one voice and one guitar, and tried to think, what can we do that would be interesting with this format? How can we fuck with this format enough to make it worth doing? And did write a song for one voice and one guitar, despite that not being at all the group's practice. And the event for which the song was written never actually happened, so the song has never been played in public. But I thought I would let you hear it, the demo recording of it, rather, because it bears very directly on everything we've talked about for the last 2 hours. The only thing you need to bear in mind here is that old Carl Perkins song the Beatles covered. It's called Act Naturally. They're gonna put me in the movies. They're gonna make a big star out of me. Keep that song in mind. If you've never heard it, actually, go listen to either the Carl Perkins or the Beatles version of Act Naturally, and then come back and listen to this, which is by the Nerve Institute and is also called Act Naturally. And until next time, mis amigas, mis hermanos, mis primas, death is just around the corner.
You're making a film about me, Harvey Oswald. It's meant for the theaters, but still might end up on TV. Well, I'll play the part, and I don't think I'll need much rehearsing. The only thing I've gotta do is act naturally. And I bet if the boys at the bureau are listening, they've built up a file in my name, including each one of the 100 petitions I signed when I thought we couldn't blame anyone but ourselves. Rifle we ordered is past the designer's inspection. They've blocked off the highway in Dallas so I can take aim. Now I spend all my weekends coiled up in a 6th-story window. And when we stop shooting, I sit there exactly the same. And the cameras love me, the billboards above me all blossom like butcher shop roses. But Simmons gets busy and I've gotten dizzy recalling the autopsy poses I strike in my sleep. Trains need to meet my body. Doubles, doubles, double. Need a permit for the shot. Need a gun sight we ain't got. Scripts to euthanize the trouble. Identical men take identical cars to the airstrip. Another 3 locked in a boxcar with 2 shifty cops. No details, no faces, no surnames to place underneath them. I'd hate to be me playing me when the other shoes